On today's show, we almost see history from Giannis, a record that at this point, Frank, it feels like it's never going to fall for how many close calls we've had. And here's Michael Redd just clinging to that 57 points. And oh, by the way, the Bucks lose to the Pacers. So we'll get to all of that on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And you are tuned in to Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, that you hear on the show quite frequently, joined by Frank Madden, longtime host of the pod. Today, we thank you for making Locked On your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Frank, it seemed like we were going to see a motivated Giannis after the ejection last night. We certainly got that. But before we get to Giannis' stat line, I am just begging. Can the Bucks have one game where the first quarter is not like a sub 20 shooting percentage and you dig into an 18-point deficit?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine a lot of Bucks fans are feeling very cynical watching them go down 27-9 and Indiana just, rhythmically finding wide open 3-point shooters. And I mean, this is an offense that is probably going to be, if not top 5, right around that level. So I mean, this is a team that, you looked at it and you're like, man, I hope the Bucks don't give up 150 tonight. That was coming in. I had that thought because we saw them light up the Bucks last year, even with the defense that now seems so far away. the Bucks defenses of yesteryear, the Wolverine meme, my Drew Holiday, playing defense, looking at yesteryear. So look, Indiana is always going to be a tough matchup when they come out and make all of the 3-pointers. Especially with the caliber of defenders the Bucks have on the wings, like it's going to feel very helpless. And when they go down 27-9. I mean, of course I'm thinking of the Toronto game and the Atlanta game where it's like, man, if the Bucks either win by 4 or just like lose by $1 billion, like that was what was going through my head. It's like, are we going to get another just complete no-show blowout loss? But I didn't tweet anything about that because, again, I mean, you look at the numbers, we see it so often in the NBA when teams get out to big leads, but it's entirely driven by 3-point shooting differential. Give it a minute, right? Like let's see how that kind of plays out. We saw, the Toronto game, even the Atlanta games, like those 3-point differentials actually kind of equalized over the course of the game, and the Bucks were still not competitive because they didn't do a lot of like pretty much anything else. But in this game they did, and obviously, it began and ultimately ended, for better or worse, with Giannis. There was no answer for at least 44 minutes from the Pacers. To stopping him, and Chris Middleton still only 21 minutes, but he had a couple of really strong offensive runs, especially in the first half when they were coming back. Him and Giannis are kind of just taking turns, kind of dragging the Bucks back into the game. But yeah, I mean, it just felt like against that Indiana offense, even though the Bucks were good defensively, you're always kind of liable to see them just rip off a 3-point barrage. And unfortunately tonight, both these teams played on a back-to-back. One of them looked like they were playing on a back-to-back, and it was not the Pacers. And it just felt like at the end there with the Bucks, beginning with Giannis, he obviously looked gassed. Didn't have a long shift last night, which probably helped to an extent, even aside from the motivation, just the fact that he only played 22 minutes or whatever last night. But he's a guy that, Giannis will get gassed visibly more so than a lot of guys. And tonight, I mean, he was just creating all of these baskets basically by himself, just annihilating Miles Turner one-on-one for much of the night. And yeah, it just clearly he got tired, and the Bucks just looked tired, and Indiana did not look tired. And I think just the blitzing with smaller guys that they did on Giannis, he coughed up the ball repeatedly, bad passes, just again his luck ran out. And unfortunately, they give away a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. They were up, I think, 117, 108 on a 3-point opportunity that Giannis had. He misses the free throw, and then they kind of let go of the rope there. So, good fight back. Obviously, this game could have been uncompetitive if they had kind of thrown in the towel. They didn't. They kept going. And I mean, I don't know how often you're going to be this competitive in games where you get outscored by 36 points from the 3-point line. Indiana hits 23s, Bucks 8. And it just, it always felt like it was going to be uphill because of that. And unfortunately, yeah, you waste a monster night. Giannis's first road 50-point game. And as you alluded to, I mean, really should have had 58 or 60 points.
60, yeah.
If he was, maybe in a bit better shape. He's talked about that, obviously missing kind of a lot of the summer with recovering from the knee injury. He's maybe from a cardio game shape perspective, maybe isn't where he wants to be at this point. So yeah, too bad. Wasted monster Giannis night, but it went down with Giannis, at the end of the day. And credit to the Pacers. They had a better game plan down the stretch. They found a way to stop the Bucks, and the Bucks could not stop them. That was for sure.
There's not a lot of teams that the Bucks have been able to stop, at least consistently this year, because there's been pockets where the defense has gotten better, and I wouldn't say good, but they've at least taken a step forward. Because look, it's gonna take time for this team to. My thought all along was if they can be like league average, but I think you were naive, not you personally, but anybody that thought this, you were naive to think losing Drew Holiday, like, well, there'll still be a top 10 defense because they have Giannis and Brook Lopez, because of how important Drew was in that scheme in funneling guys to your rim protector. So all along, I just felt like, man, if they can somehow get to like 12th, 15th, somewhere in there, just like finish in the top half defensively in your defensive rating, great. Because I expect the offense, it's not there yet, but the offense will be elite. And I think what we're seeing is it's probably going to take even more time than any of us envisioned. I know everybody loves Andre Jackson Jr. and Marjan Beauchamp, and we've certainly seen nice signs from them and good flashes. But look, part of it too, and I'm curious what you think, is those guys that have looked good in this system. Number one, it's a totally different system. And whether or not they have the personnel for it defensively is an entirely separate conversation. But the young guys are the guys that have stood out. And I think a big part of that is, number one, they do fit the scheme that Griff wants to run, but also this is the only thing they know at the NBA level. Whereas you have Brooke and Chris and Giannis, who have played together and have played a totally different system for years. And you're asking them, hey, unlearn everything that you've done for the last 5 years and do something completely different. And I think especially in the first 5 or so games, you see that confusion where you're kind of caught in between. And Griff has talked about this before too, of you can't have that indecisiveness because that's where you get killed. And JJ Redick said it on his podcast last week too, with a little more crude words, that when it becomes mental and when you're not sure what should I do, that's when you're screwed, basically. And I think that's where the Bucks have been living for a large part of this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best case scenario for the Bucks defensively this year was going to be, they capture lightning in a bottle in a little bit with kind of, a new coaching staff, maybe re-energizes the old guard a little bit. Again, maybe the kind of injection of some youth, and, maybe it's only natural that some staleness is going to set in over time where you're playing kind of the same way for a long period with Bud. Kudos to Bud, right? Like, it's not like they were doing the exact same thing last year that they did 5 years ago. They made some pretty fundamental, maybe not fundamental change, but like an important change in terms of like sending less help last year, and it paid off. I mean, the way that they played last year, I think, was the most idealized version of defense that they played at any point. at least sort of like schematically at any point in the Bud era. And
with what
so,
they had. Yeah, like when you
yeah,
had a
and that
PJ
they had
Tucker could switch more. Yeah.
yeah. But last year, I mean, they had Drew and they had Javon Carter. And that, those guys and Brooke having an incredible year, Giannis being Giannis, they were able to, kind of realize kind of the full potential, at least in the regular season, obviously playoffs, not so much, but in the regular season, the shot chart was great. They cut down on 3-pointers, et cetera. And again, they didn't force turnovers, but they did kind of everything else. And this year, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge because you're not only basically taking, most notably, we saw Brooke Lopez obviously be thrown out of his comfort zone. Speaking of which, we saw Brooke late in the game switching and having to defend, Tyrese Halliburton and Matherin and 25 feet from the basket, down in the last few minutes, which, to me just says like, you know what, this isn't a Brooke Lopez closing game. And again, like, was it a Bobby Portis closing game? He had been in there a while. Maybe not that either. But it just sort of underscores, right? Like, yes, Chris is on a minutes limit. He played, again, sort of 21 minutes. I desperately want to see him hit 25 soon so we can eventually get up to 30. But, yes, Chris is on a minutes limit. They have to bide his time so that he can close as he did tonight. And you didn't have Dame. But, man, it feels like more guys are missing. It feels like like you're looking at the guys out there. It's like, are we really only missing Damian Lillard, who should not be impacting the quality of our defense? Let's be honest. But when the other guys that have to step up are Campaign and more Malik Beasley, yeah, there's just that ain't great. And again, against a team like this, they're going to expose you. Like, we've seen it before. We've seen it again last year. They ran the Bucks off the floor in that game in Milwaukee. They gave the Bucks all they could handle a couple other times as well. So it's hard, but again, like, I've joked about me being the curmudgeon, who doesn't like the youth, but I don't know. I mean, like, it's going to take time and also trades
Yeah.
or something, right? Like, I think the only way that, I can see this defense, like, being able to be competent enough to be championship worthy is either there's, a trade for a wing defender who can start at the 2 and be, a crunch time guy. And again, like, is Royce O'Neal good enough, right? I've mused about Dorian Finney-Smith. Alex Caruso would be phenomenal, but it's like, what can you get with the limited assets the Bucks have, right? Which could be just Bobby Portis. I don't know if Pat Connaughton's bringing back one of those guys. So it's going to be a tough spot. I think they have the Portland second rounder next year. That might be the best asset they have. So I will never discount John Horst's ability to, squeeze blood from the stone or whatever. Because I didn't think pretty much any, a lot of the trades they've made, I was like, oh, they wouldn't, you can't get that for that. And then you do. So we'll see. But absent a trade, I mean, I think you gotta see more of what you have with Marjan's been playing every night, obviously. So I think that's been a positive. And as I said when I was talking to Camille today, like, I don't have a big problem with kind of the guys that are in the top 10. I think obviously the Malik Beasley starting thing, like, just it just doesn't work. But I also understand why he would be loath to just like throw Marjan into the starting 5 and just say like, you got it, big guy. And because then if Marjan struggles, then it's like, all right, then what do you do, right? Then you bench the guy. You hurt his confidence. I understand, like, kind of like wanting to ease maybe a guy like Marjan into that responsibility. And he's been, solid, right? But he also hasn't, like, I'd say, aced the test. Like, it's so far it's more about Malik Beasley just not being a good fit with the starting 5 than somebody else kind of really earning it. And again, it may be Jay Crowder that gets that job just because of the kind of veteran adult in the room type stuff. But yeah, I think again, this game, again, just sort of like really, laid bare. It's like, man, when you go against teams that are, a well-oiled machine offensively, like it is going to be a struggle, and you're going to have to be fighting tooth and nail, and just it's going to come down to just like hoping they miss, pretty good looks, and eventually they missed enough that the Bucks were kind of able to claw back into it, but it obviously required a monster night from Giannis and a really big offensive night in general. Which again, like I mean, a 122 offensive rating without Dame, like, whoa, that's impressive no matter who it's against. But yeah, again, it's hard, and unfortunately, they won all their close games leading up to this, which kind of led to maybe this inflated 5-2 record, and at some point your luck runs out.
Yeah, the expected win-loss is probably 2-6 for this team so far this season. I know it was 2-5 after the game against the Pistons. So this was the first time that you ran into that issue in crunch time. We've mentioned Giannis. We've danced around it, but we do have to spend some time on the night that Giannis had, and especially for how he had looked to start the season, what we saw from him, and just how incredible that performance was. So we'll get to that in just a second, but we spend a lot of time, you, me, Camille, all of us together, and we get fired up together on wins and losses. Who starts? Who sits? I'm thankful for that connection we have. And today I want our chat to become more personal. I just learned you can get a 1-year supply on ED medications. You realize what that means. Bring on extended travel, bring on the next natural disaster or supply chain issue. You're covered. You don't have to worry about whether or not you can refill your generics for Cialis, Viagra, Vivatio prescription. And this is possibly because of our friends at Jace Medical. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication, and use promo code Locked On at checkout for a discount as well. Verified customer had this to say about Jace. I'm thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half. And having to do that. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year supply. Also ordered antibiotic kits. I feel secure now. Price is lower than my local pharmacy. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year supply of any daily med, go to jacemedical.com. That's JASE, and see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code Locked On for $20 off your purchase. Frank, one thing on the rise tonight was Giannis's point production, 54 points, 46 that he had through 3 quarters. By my half research that I did, I think that's a franchise record. It's definitely a record in the shot clock era. Oddly enough, passing Drew Holiday for most points scored through 3 quarters, which I believe Holiday did against the Pacers last year as well. But he was unstoppable. And you mentioned what the Pacers were doing to try to slow him down. It finally started to catch up towards the end when Giannis was clearly gassed. But what stood out to me was the efficiency, because Giannis hadn't looked like that guy for most of this season. Obviously, a lot goes into play there with the offseason he had and the conditioning for those reasons that you spoke of. But something just looked off with Giannis. And look, you have to factor in the whole learning to play with Dame too, and vice versa for Dame. And I did think it was maybe not totally coincidental that tonight it was basically Giannis, Chris, and Brooke. And offensively, they looked a little more comfortable of, hey, we remember how to do this, and let's just feed Giannis. And it showed with this performance tonight.
It's interesting, going back to opening night, the Bucks looked really bad when Giannis was out there having to sort of carry the offense. I remember this in the second quarter, and there was like some crazy plus minus differentials where like Chris and Dame were like plus 20 and Giannis was like minus something at halftime. And it felt like, it feels about right, because it felt like the offense just kind of like ground to a halt when Giannis was having to kind of quarterback the offense. And we saw last year there were, let's just say, distinct limitations to how effective their offense could be. Their offense was generally pretty bad when he was out there without either Chris, Drew, or Joe Ingles, who obviously also was a really important playmaker for them last year. But I give him credit. I haven't looked at the numbers here to see kind of where they are this year, but it's felt like since that game, he's been like remarkably good playing without Dame, or at times even Chris. Chris, I feel like is just always, the tonic to some of the, offensive grinding that they kind of get into. But I mean, it was pretty remarkable to watch him go to work tonight. And again, Indiana is obviously a team that has some severe limitations defensively, but I mean, Miles Turner obviously is a phenomenal shot blocker, and I mean, Giannis just torched him. I mean, it was crazy how easily he got around around him, over him. I don't think he actually had like a facial dunk on top of his head, but it was basically because he was able to drive by him seemingly every time. And it got to the point there where in the fourth quarter, he had that play where, it was like doubling him on a pick on a, at the top, and he splits the pick and roll and gets all the way to the basket. I mean, it was some really impressive stuff, and kind of, I just, we still often get into these sort of debates about skills with Giannis. But to be, at 7 feet tall, able to handle and get to his spots and finish with both hands, I mean, that is just a remarkable skill set. We've never seen a guy in the history of the sport that can dribble and create shots for himself from nothing, at the rim the way that he has. And it annoys me that, like, I bring this up every once in a while, but I mean, the list of guys his size that can handle it as well as him is like KD, and I think KD's like a wing basically, right? Like just a tall wing. I mean, he is one of one, right? It's just crazy to be as big as he is and to be that natural with the ball in his hands, and to, it's funny to think about him when he was younger, like to have developed from, a guy who was like more of a playmaker, not a scorer, like as a young guy, to now just this absolutely dominant shot creating, high usage scorer. It's pretty remarkable. And it's, Kane and I always used to joke, right, about wanting to make sure we don't take Giannis for granted. And,
Yeah.
this is just one of those nights where, I guess we left it until a couple segments in to really unpack it.
Yeah. Oh,
We
by the way,
spent a while complaining. Yeah, I'll own it. I was, spending time complaining about the Bucks defense and ignoring that, like, oh, we got to watch Giannis, ho hum score 54 points on 25 shots and hit 16 of 18 free throws. He's up to 68% from the foul line this year. So, okay. But oops. But yeah, I mean, what more could you ask for, just in terms of, up until obviously just kind of running out of gas? And I mean, I hope Giannis also takes away something from the fact that he attempted only 1 3 tonight, did not make it. I think it was late in the second quarter. It was kind of a feeling himself type shot. He has 28 points in the first half, 26 in the second half. I mean, remarkably balanced scoring. I think he scored 38 over the two middle quarters, and they just couldn't do anything with him. So, and I think too, I mean, it felt like pretty much all of it was in the half court. Like, I don't think Giannis was really, I don't know that he
There's
had
a
much of
handful of
anything
transition, but yeah,
yeah,
it wasn't a lot.
yeah, yeah. So it was really just him in large part, just kind of creating. And again, Chris doing Chris stuff, finding him with nice passes, just that connection is always impressive. But, yeah, I mean, it was just an incredibly impressive performance, and hit some mid rangers, but for the most part, obviously, this was him just getting to the rim just over and over and over and over again, and making the free throws. Interesting, it felt like he was 16 of 18. And I feel like
Yeah.
at least half those free throws were front rim, bounce around and in, which he gets some of those, but you don't really associate him with having that kind of soft touch,
The shooter's
getting the
touch.
roll.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shooter's touch. So it was obviously a pretty cool to see him, settle down, and especially in the road, right? Like you kind of always wonder, like, how much is he infected? I think his career, he's pretty much an even road home shooting splits guy. Although I don't know if it was a year or 2 years ago, he did shoot better at home. But I do sometimes wonder, like, is like the absolute silence at Fiserv, like, is that actually not a good thing for him? Like, I think we've seen during the title run that almost like the counting and the crowd sort of like getting like almost like got him in, like forced him into a rhythm and got him out of just like standing up there and like taking 3 deep breaths or whatever it was. Um, so yeah, I mean, just really an incredible performance.
Yeah, incredible. And look, you knew what Giannis was doing. If you didn't see the box score, you knew like, man, he really must be going off. As soon as you saw Daniel Tice check in for the first time this season, where the Pacers and Rick Carlisle were basically like, I don't know, we're out of options here. So I guess go see if you can get him, Dan. Good luck. You got 6 fouls.
Yeah, and again, I mean, like they started sending like doubling him, bringing up the
Yep.
ball. I mean, they were kind of throwing the kitchen sink at him, and that's where obviously not having Dame to close, like
Yep.
you really felt it, right? Because Giannis having to create when he's tired, and he just doesn't have a ball handler, shot creator other than Chris out there, and um, it was obviously a tall order, and obviously it just kind of went. I mean, let's be honest, he over them. It was bad. Like it did not. Let's just say it did not match what he was doing up until that point. But um, credit for Carlisle. I mean, he won the chess match against Joe Prunty, who we saw leading the Bucks on the sidelines for the first time since spring of 2018.
2018.
Yeah, he became the Bucks coach a couple days before my daughter was born. I remember watching the Bucks played the Nets while I was still in the hospital with my wife, and I think Giannis had like 40 some points, yammed on Jared Allen a couple times, and the Bucks won, and it was a nice feel good because I think he was like out with a knee injury or something like that. So I distinctly remember the start of the Joe Prunty era. Uh, I do not imagine that we are hoping for another Joe Prunty era. But it was certainly interesting that Adrian Griffin, after the last game when Giannis gets ejected, made a point of saying that he needs to be more vocal in protecting Giannis. And then, lo and behold, he got, I guess, yeah, in the pool
We didn't
report,
see
it
it.
said that. In the pool report, it said that he got 2 technicals, but I mean, it felt like it was just an immediate
Yeah.
"you're gone." And did they only shoot
I
one
only
tackle free
remember,
throw?
yeah, I was gonna say I only
Yeah.
remember seeing one free throw. So
Yeah, which I mean, you can like they can just ring you up and chuck
yeah,
you,
yeah,
without having to call like 2 separate
yep.
technicals. So I don't know that I fully understand the explanation that we got, but whatever. The pool explanation. I was saying on Twitter yesterday that like the pool explanations are worthless. They're basically the Perd Hapley, way of saying like, why was he called for a foul? He was fouled, so we called a foul. Or
He made
it's just
contact with his
complete.
arm, and by the
Yeah.
rule, that's a foul.
Yes, yes. So whatever. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess the Bucks played a bit better after that. Got fired up a little bit. I don't know, but clearly, whatever Joe Prunty was trying to cook up in the last few minutes with Brook Lopez switching far from the basket, and the offense just kind of looking frazzled by the Pacers' pressure. Obviously, did not uh did not inspire the closing push kick that the Bucks needed, but good job, good effort.
You mentioned one of the Giannis stats I do want to get to in just a second, but first we have to tell you about Prize Picks. It's the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, pros, and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has a way for you to play alongside their favorite players like rapper Meek Mill, comedian Andrew Schultz. You can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. We'll have to ask him about an ejection insurance policy as well. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That site again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA and you'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Frank, we mentioned the free throw shooting and 16 of 18 that he finished. Extremely small sample size theater. But if you take out opening night, Giannis is up to, I think, 73% shooting at the free throw line, that he's, albeit 7 games, but quietly started to look at least adequate at the free throw line. And you mentioned not having Dame and how much that changed things. Dame is clearly the closer and the guy that you want to get the ball in the hands of to close the games. But maybe it's a pipe dream because we've been asking for this for years. If Giannis can sit at 70% at the free throw line, that solves a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he did it 2 years ago, right? I mean, the most confounding thing about Giannis's shooting is that he was what? I think he was like 68% or something his rookie year under Larry Drew.
Yeah.
And then the entirety of the Jason Kidd era, he was a good free throw shooter.
Yeah.
Like, he was like, I don't know, like 73 to, I think that one year, 77, 78%, and he had really long routines, right? I remember Joel Persbilla counting off in a Blazers game in Milwaukee to get him a 10-second violation. It's not like he had some great routine then. It was prolonged and painful to watch and all that other stuff. But it also, I mean, every year in the playoffs, he's always gotten worse from the free throw line in the playoffs. I think his rookie year, or not his rookie year, sorry, his second year, I think is the only time he's ever had a playoff series where he's shot above 70% from the foul line. So, as much as, yes, he hit 17 and 19 in a game 6 finals clinching appearance where he scored 50 points. But for the most part, he has, seemingly felt the pressure of the playoffs and always shot worse in the playoffs, irrespective of what's been happening in the regular season. And, for some reason, after, Bud comes in, his free throw shooting kind of immediately dipped. And then obviously he had, a couple years where it was, noticeably bad, right? I think 3 out of the 5 years he was kind of notably under 70%. So, to me, like, yes, does Giannis have kind of mechanical things that, bad habits that he occasionally falls into in terms of, shooting it on like the way down or like doing kind of weird things with mechanics? Yeah, but lots of guys shoot 75% and don't have perfect mechanics, right? And so I think for him, to me, I'm 100% in this is a mental thing, and it's just something that sometimes he gets into these funks with, and it's going to come down to, can he avoid, he's going to have random games where he's going to shoot poorly, but can he night in and night out usually shoot reasonably well? And knock on wood, of late, he's been doing that. Obviously tonight, he really did that. But last year was a bit weird. He shoots 63% in October, 59.6 in November. And then he was kind of like he went to 69% in December, down to 63% in February, 68% in March. He never really got into like any like extended rhythm. He was under 70% every month in 22-23 after being, above 70% for the season in 21-22. So I have no explanation, and I don't think Giannis would either, other than it's something going on between his ears. And honestly, I think probably part of the reason he's gotten worse over his career might be because he's bulked up so much, and maybe carrying all that muscle and just losing maybe some flexibility maybe has impacted his free throw shooting to some extent. I don't know. But I think, again, I would say this is mostly a mental thing because, look, we're not asking him to do anything he hasn't done before, right? Give me 71%, 71.7, whatever he was 2 years ago, and we'd be thrilled. So we'll see. Yeah, just all we can do is kind of sit back and wait for the sample to get larger and hope that he has a lot more nights like this than the 3 for 10 nights he had on opening night. But I guess the good news is since then it's been generally trending in the right direction.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, 54 points for Giannis is, I guess we got to point that out again, and to the point of not taking him for granted. But man, this is like 5 times in the last 2 years where you get the feeling of he's breaking the franchise record tonight, and then for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen. So Michael Redd, the happiest guy in the world tonight, that record is still standing at 57. Bucks have an interesting part of the schedule coming up that let's hope is good, and especially for this team taking some steps forward, because we touched on some of the areas where, hey, they weren't too bad here tonight. A lot of that was a product of the opponent, that the Pacers are not a good rebounding team. And same in transition. Their offense is very good. Defensively, not so much. Defensively, period. The Pacers, not so good. And the Bucks transition offense, even without Giannis really leading the charge, looked much better tonight, where they were at least closer to a league average transition offense by the numbers. And then rebounding too, Bucks did a much better job on the glass. So between that and what you have coming up, we're really, I think, the 11 games you have left between now and the end of the month of November, there's really 3 that you would point to and say, like, this is going to be a tough game. This is a really good opponent when you have a team like the Mavericks. And again, thinking about the backcourt that the Bucks have had issues slowing down. You got the Boston Celtics on there, and then the Miami Heat in the prestigious in-season tournament. So like those are really the 3 games you would look at. Otherwise, there's a lot of opportunities coming up for this team to, even if it's just beating up on an inferior opponent, to at least get some of those wins and look better in some of these areas that we've been venting about, to, if nothing else, boost the confidence moving forward. So that starts Saturday, tomorrow, as you listen to this, with the Orlando Magic. And I'll be back tomorrow to do a pregame pod, game preview for that Magic matchup. But Frank, you'll be back next week, as we got Chicago Bulls on Monday. And then, of course, the game that everybody can't wait for, the revenge game in Toronto against the Raptors. So we'll see how Griff draws up the adjustments, and it can't possibly be any worse than the first matchup between those two teams.
I mean, if they get their doors blown off in that game, it's going to be pretty tough. And the hard part is, I mean, while they don't have a ton of, like, you know, it's not as, you wouldn't say it's a murderer's row that they're facing here through the end of the month. You know,
it's
East
a lot of
is,
like average teams.
Yeah, it's a lot of teams that, with the way the Bucks have been playing, like, given how they've been playing, and just, they don't play 48 minutes, right? They certainly don't play the first 6 minutes of these games.
Really?
Yeah, 12. You know, you're just going to be playing with fire if you just don't get to kind of a higher, you know, baseline level. You know, Orlando's a good example, right? I mean, the reason the Bucks won 58 games last year is because those kinds of teams, I mean, they swept the Magic. The Magic are a frisky team. They had, you know, some good wins last year. I mean, they beat the Celtics, I think, at least a couple times.
Yep.
They won. I remember watching a game in Philly where Mo Wagner tortured Joel Embiid towards the end. So again, like, if they're going to be like the top 2 team that everyone thought they were going to be coming this season, I mean, they are going to need to, like, take care of business and not, you know, F around with these kinds of games against sort of these young, frisky types of teams. So Orlando's better than they were last year. But again, Bucks, like, if you're as good as you think you are, if you're a title contender, like, you know, you're going to lose some of these games, but you're going to have to win most of them. So, yeah, it's going to just continue to be a good test. And we're all obviously especially curious, you know, is there some sense of answers on the defensive end? Hey, like I said, I was said on Twitter, you know, Andre Jackson played 9 minutes, 5 fouls, 1 steal, no other stats in the last 24 hours. And I'm like, give this guy more minutes. That was fun. I was enjoying it. But, you know, legitimately, like, you know, him and Marjan, you know, whether it was putting them at the top of the zone or, you know, in kind of a more traditional scheme, they're kind of like the only guys where it feels like, man, they can just, like, physically hold their own and move their feet, and they've got the athleticism to actually, like, really compete defensively, compared to, again, just like the guys that are playing ahead of them, who are older, smaller, slower, and don't have that same juice. So I think there is something think, Griff said, referred to Andre's defense as like contagious. And I think that's exactly what it is. It just feels like when he's in there, they get a shot in the arm. And so, it's really early. Like, it's a marathon. So for these rookies, like if they're not playing now, like who knows, right? They're going to get some chances, especially given that the Bucks have had like no injuries basically so far. Game being out tonight is really kind of the first one of note. So guys are going to get chances, and you just hope they're ahead of the curve. The Bucks really need those dudes to be ahead of the curve because the curve is ahead of a lot of the vets right now, especially on the defensive end.
Well, and last thing is, not only did he say that defense is contagious, but again, and this isn't a knock on Bud, because I think you've articulated, and I have here and elsewhere as well, that like I think a lot of people lost sight of how good of a coach Bud was in the aftermath of the firing, and just that series and how it all just came undone against the Miami Heat. I think it was time for a change, but he's still a very good coach that raises.
You don't think Marjan would have shut down Jimmy Butler? Is that what
But my point is the difference, at least for me, in what I do between Bud and what we get from Adrian Griffin, where you get a lot of candid answers from Griff. If you listen to what he says pregame and postgame, that there's a lot to take from that. And, obviously Bud, coming from the pop tree, was much more guarded and didn't want to give away too much. But tonight, the last thing that I'll touch on is, Griff said not only is Andre Jackson's defense contagious, but also said he's an important piece of our team moving forward. I don't know when. It could be this year. It could be next year. But he's definitely a piece of our future. And, look, that's step one in hearing that and seeing the minutes that Marjan is getting and those reps as well. So that's an encouraging part for this team as they try to fix the defense and move forward. We'll wrap it up there. As I mentioned, Frank will be back on the post games next week. I'll do a game preview on Saturday before the Magic game, and hopefully we're not cleaning up a mess on Monday when we return. For Frank, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you on Saturday.